Imagine waking up one morning to find your phone flooded with messages. Not congratulations, not fan mail, but threats, death threats, telling you that you and your family are not safe. Now imagine that you're a professional footballer who just gave everything he had for his country, and this is your reward. This is not fiction. This is the real story of Alexander Sørloth. And it's one of the most disturbing, most human, and most painfully honest stories in modern football. Stay with us, because by the end of this, you won't just know who Alexander Sørloth is. You'll understand what it truly costs to carry a nation on your back. His name is Alexander Sørloth, a giant of a man, 6'4", built like a warrior. A striker who has terrorized defenders across some of Europe's most elite leagues. He has scored goals in La Liga, the Bundesliga, and on the grandest European stages. He wears the captain's armband for Norway with a pride that goes beyond football. He is his country's greatest hope, their golden boy, their warrior. But after Norway's painful FIFA World Cup qualification exit, something deeply ugly rose to the surface. Reports began circulating that Sørloth had received death threats, messages so serious, so vile, that they shook even the toughest people in Norwegian football. And this raises a question that every one of us needs to sit with. What kind of world have we become where a man is threatened with death for losing a football match? But to truly understand this story, we have to go back, way back, to a cold corner of Norway where a boy was born with nothing but talent, love, and a burning dream. Alexander Sørloth was born on the 5th of December 1995 in Trondheim, Norway. If you've never heard of Trondheim, picture this, a medieval city in the north of Scandinavia where winters are brutal, the nights are long, and the cold gets into your bones. It is not a city that produces many football superstars, but it produced Alexander. He grew up in a family where football wasn't just a hobby, it was a language. His grandfather, Odd Sørloth, was a legend in Norwegian football, a man who played for the national team and built a legacy before Alexander was even born. So when little Alexander first kicked a ball, it wasn't random. It felt like destiny, like the sport was already in his blood, waiting for its moment. His childhood was stable, grounded, and rooted in sport. His family supported him fiercely. But support and belief can only take a young player so far. What comes next, the real journey, that's where the soul of a footballer is forged. From the moment Alexander could run, he was chasing a ball. He joined Trondheim's Ørn as a young boy, one of the local youth clubs in his city. Tall for his age, powerful, and already showing that relentless determination that would later define his career. He trained in conditions that weren't always comfortable. Norwegian winters don't offer warm pitches and perfect grass. Sometimes you train in the cold. Sometimes the ground is frozen. But Alexander showed up every single time. He watched his grandfather's legacy like a map. He wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for a family name, for a heritage. That pressure would have crushed most kids, but for Alexander, it was fuel. By his teenage years, it was clear he was different. The size was there, the strength was there, and slowly the technique and the hunger began to match the physical gifts. He moved through the youth ranks with a quiet intensity, not flashy, not arrogant, just relentlessly focused. But the road to the top was never going to be a straight line. And this is where Alexander's story gets real. His early professional career was far from the fairy tale outsiders might imagine. He had spells at clubs where he struggled to nail down a starting spot. He moved to Groningen in the Netherlands, and it didn't work out the way anyone hoped. He joined Crystal Palace in the Premier League, one of the biggest opportunities of his young life, and barely played. Think about that for a second. You're in the Premier League, the biggest league on the planet, and you're watching from the bench week after week, wondering if your chance will ever come. He went out on loan to Ghent in Belgium, to Midtjylland in Denmark. Some players, when they're bounced around on loan like that, they break. They question themselves. They start believing the voices that say maybe they're not good enough, maybe they don't belong at the top level. And Alexander felt all of that. He's spoken about the mental difficulty of those years, the loneliness of being far from home in countries where you don't speak the language, the frustration of training hard and not being given the chance to show what you can do. Injuries crept in too. There were moments of darkness that only those closest to him truly understood. But here's what separated Alexander Sørloth from the players who disappear into the lower leagues and are forgotten. He never stopped believing, and he never stopped working. The turning point came in Turkey, and it came like an earthquake. When Alexander joined Trabzonspor on loan in 2019, very few people expected what happened next. Turkey is not always the first destination people think of when they imagine a player's career renaissance. But sometimes the right environment at the right time changes everything. And for Sørloth, Trabzonspor was that environment.
He exploded. He was unstoppable. He scored 24 goals in the Turkish Super Lig in a single season, a record-breaking campaign that made the entire football world sit up and take notice. He wasn't just scoring tap-ins, he was scoring headers, volleys, long-range strikes. He was dominating physically. He was leading the line like a man possessed. Trabzonspor won the Turkish League title, their first in decades, and Sørloth was at the very heart of it. Suddenly, the phone calls started coming. The big clubs began circling. The boy who sat on the bench at Crystal Palace, who was loaned out to clubs most people had barely heard of, was now being chased by giants. In 2020, RB Leipzig came calling. Germany, the Bundesliga, the Champions League. He'd done it. He'd broken through. And from there, the Alexander Sørloth story became one of consistent excellence at the highest level. He moved to Real Sociedad in Spain's La Liga, where he continued to score goals and establish himself as one of the most complete strikers in European football. Then came Atletico Madrid, the club of Diego Simeone, of tactical warfare, of grinding out results in the most pressurized environments imaginable. And even there, in that relentless system, Sørloth delivered. For Norway, he became the talisman, the captain, the man the entire nation looked to when the big moments arrived. He broke scoring records for the national team. He carried their World Cup qualifying campaigns on his shoulders. He was the reason Norwegian fans dared to dream again. Off the pitch, Alexander has built a life that reflects his character. He's a private man, not the type to flood social media with flashy cars and luxury holidays, though the success has certainly brought him financial rewards that place him firmly among Europe's elite earners. Estimated career earnings and market value put him in a bracket that very few Norwegian footballers have ever reached. But money has never appeared to be what drives him. What drives him is legacy. What drives him is the idea of being the player who finally takes Norway to a major tournament for the first time since 1998. That dream sits deep in his chest like a fire that refuses to go out. His family remains central to his life. He's known as a devoted person to those he loves, and quietly, he has been involved in charitable activities and community efforts, the kind that don't make headlines, but make a real difference. But the football world is not always kind to its heroes, and this is where we return to the moment that broke something in the story of Alexander Sørloth. Norway's World Cup qualifying campaign ended in heartbreak. The exits, the difficult results, the moments that didn't go Norway's way, they left a nation in pain. And in that pain, some people, faceless, cowardly people, turned on the man who had given everything he had.
Death threats. Reports suggest that Alexander Sørloth received messages threatening his life and the safety of those around him. The Norwegian football authorities took the situation seriously. The story sent shockwaves through the football world, and it sparked a conversation that goes far beyond Alexander Sørloth himself. We live in an age where players are accessible like never before. Social media breaks down every wall between a footballer and millions of strangers. Most of the time, that connection is beautiful. Fans feel close to their heroes. But sometimes, in the darkest corners of that connection, something monstrous appears. Something that reminds us that fame in the modern world can carry a terrible price. Alexander Sørloth's response was measured, dignified, and brave. He continued. He kept showing up. He kept training, because that is who he is. What does Alexander Sørloth mean to Norwegian football? He's more than a striker. He's a symbol. He's a proof that the journey is rarely straight, that the setbacks, the Crystal Palace benches, the lone spells of years of doubt don't define you. What defines you is what you do after those moments. What defines you is whether you get back up. He has inspired a generation of Norwegian footballers to believe that they can compete at the highest level. He has shown that Scandinavia can produce world-class strikers who don't just survive in European elite leagues, but genuinely thrive in them. And in a way, the death threats, as horrifying as they are, only make his story more important. Because how a society treats its athletes in moments of failure says everything about that society's soul. Football should never be a matter of life and death. It is a sport, a beautiful, passionate, glorious sport. But it is a sport, and no player, no matter the result, no matter the disappointment, should ever fear for their life because of a football match. Alexander Sørloth is still playing, still scoring, still fighting for the shirt that means everything to him. His story is not finished, not even close. And perhaps that's the most powerful of all this. The threats didn't break him. The setbacks didn't break him. Nothing has broken him. Because some people are built differently. Some people carry adversity not as a weight, but as armor. The next time you watch Alexander Sørloth step onto a pitch, whether it's for his club or for Norway, remember what it took to get him there. Remember the frozen training pitches of Trondheim. Remember the Crystal Palace bench. Remember the loan spells in places far from home. Remember the death threats that came after he poured his heart into a shirt. And then watch him play, watch him fight, watch him run for every ball like it might be the last one he ever chases. Because that is Alexander Sørloth, a man who has stared at the darkest parts of this sport and walked straight through them. Some players play for glory. Alexander Sørloth plays for something deeper than that. He plays because it is who he is, and no one, no threat, no result, no heartbreak will ever take that away from him.